Now, often people like me to go through like different cases that I've seen. So I'll touch on a few here. Recently, about 4 months ago, a gentleman from the valley started the treatment with the oil. He had two tumors right here in his stomach, on the upper stomach, and his throat. There was a big tumor in his throat. So he started the treatment. About 6 weeks in, he gives me a call back, and he said, Rick, he said, the tumors in my stomach are gone. And he said, the one that around my throat, he said, it's shrunk up to 1/10 the size it was. And he said, I'm going in for a CAT scan in 2 weeks. So I said, why? You know, I said, do you really have to go in and take a massive dose of radiation to have some stupid machine tell you that you're being healed when you can see it yourself? But in truth, that's how brainwashed people have become. We have to hear it from the medical system. It's just nonsense. I had another gentleman come to me, this is a couple years ago, bad arthritis. And he told me, he said, I take this medication, I take the arthritis medication every day. And he said, when the weekend comes, I have to switch to another medication to try to undo some of the damage that this medication is causing. So anyway, he started the oil. So I never hear nothing from him he just got one tube, and it was like 6 months later when I got a call from him. And he said, he asked me, he said, is there any chance that I could get some more medicine? So I said, yeah, come on down. So in he comes, and he has his 85-year-old mother with him. Now, she's just a little tiny, frail woman. She has the cane and everything, and all lumped up with arthritis. She's in bad shape. So he asked me, he said, what do you think of my mother? You know, would this medicine help my mother? And I said, well, what did it do for you? And he told me, I said, you know, you should have taken more to cure your disease. But see, he only used the one tube in 6 months. But he told me, he said, as soon as I went home, I got off the chemicals. He said, I just take the oil at night. It helps me sleep. He said, the arthritis in my shoulders is gone. And he said, it's just been the last couple of weeks that I noticed, since I've run out of oil, that it's starting to tighten up a little bit. So I explained to him, I told him, I said, you know, yes, definitely it would work for your mother, but little tiny doses. But what was funny about this, just as they were leaving, his mother, she got almost to the door and she had the cane, you know, and I looked at her and I said, dear, I said, if you get on this oil, in a few days you might find that you don't need that cane anymore. And my God, the look she shot me was just like, yeah, right, you know. She didn't believe a word of it. But about a week later, I get a knock on the door, and he comes in, or her son comes in, and he told me, he said, Rick, he said, I just had to stop in. He said, I was into Mom's the other day. He said, she came out of the bedroom, cleaned up the living room, and was out in the kitchen doing some chores and making meals. He said, no cane. Big surprise. Now, Rick Dwyer and his wife, I think some folks here have come in contact with him because they're in the video. But Rick started using the oil for his back pain. And like when I met him, he was wearing a back brace. He had 3 injuries in his back from working on the railroad. So he was smoking pot, and he said that was giving him some relief. But when he got on the oil, it just took the pain away completely. So Rick was sold on it. But his wife, she was deadly against it. Marijuana, that's drugs. We don't, you know, I don't go there. But she was in bad shape. She had several, like she had skin allergies. She had a cyst on her ovaries. She had arthritis in the back, gallbladder problems, polyps in the bowel. She had many, many medical problems. And she was taking, I think 5 or 6 different medications. So finally, she did try the oil. And within less than 3 months, it took care of every medical problem that she had. But something that was funny about it, about a month into the treatment, when they got started, Rick called me up and he said, I'm losing weight. And because Rick, he was a big guy. He was about 260 pounds when I met him. And I told him, I said, that's a common effect of this medicine. When you take the medicine, it's detoxifying you. And it does take you right back to a healthy weight. In my case, all my life, I went 180, 190 pounds. Well, the minute I got on this oil, right back to 160. And it just does marvelous things. So Rick and Margaret, Rick lost about 60 pounds and Margaret lost about 40. And it's not like being on a diet. It's just that you just don't, you're not hungry, you don't eat as much. There's nothing unhealthy about this type of weight loss. Now another gentleman I had, he was a total non-believer in this about 4 or 5 years ago when I first met him. And he'd had this thing on his nose. So we gave him a little bit of oil. It was skin cancer. And we put it on his nose, and 2 or 3 weeks it was gone, healed. So about a month goes by, and he comes up to the house one day, and he came in and he looks at me and he said, "Well, Rick," he said, "what would that oil do for hemorrhoids?" And I was sitting there like that, and I'm thinking, I've been waiting to say this to him. So I said, "Well, just take a little bit of that oil," and I said, "put it on the end of your finger, and do I have to tell you where to shove it?" And so, I mean, he just snorted. Out the house he went, mad as a wet hen. But about a month later, I'm standing up in the parking lot in Amherst in one of the big malls, and he comes up to me, like, you know, he comes up like that. "One treatment. I put that oil up there one time. I've been bleeding from the ass for 20 years. One treatment, it's gone." He couldn't believe it, you know, but that's the way the oil works. This gentleman right here, Christian Lorette, he was a non-believer in the beginning. I know the first day Chris came down to the house, he'd heard about what I was doing, so he came down to the house, and about 5 people went through that day. But during the day, he was sitting there, and I kept noticing he'd move in the chair, and I'd see pain on his face. So after the people all left that day, Christian looked at me, and he said, "Well, Rick," he said, "this is not believable." And I just looked at him, and I said, "Chris," I said, "shut off your brain and believe what your eyes are telling you." And just at that moment, he moved, and when he did, I seen the pain again. So I looked at him, and I said, "You know, what's the matter with you?" And he said, "I have scoliosis." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know what that is?" I said, "Yes, I do." And so I said, "You know, what did the medical system say?" Well, he said in 1999 they wanted to do an operation, but they would only give me a 50-50 chance of walking again. So he said, "I live with the pain." So I said, "What happens?" Well, he said, "Basically every day I wind up collapsing on the floor in agony." And about that time he kind of clued in, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, what would this oil do?" And I just looked at him and said, "Fix it." So you can see, if you had took a black marker and wrote it all over his face, you know, disbelief, total disbelief. But again, he got a tube of oil. I bumped into Christian about a week later in the Walmart, I think it was, and him too, he told me the same thing. He said, 5 hours after I took that oil, I haven't had a pain in my back since. So I was busy that day, and I just looked at him and said, "Told you." Turn around, I had to go somewhere. So about a week later, Christian comes down to the house. And he comes in with the hands on the hips like that, and he's a big man anyway, as you can see. But he came in with the hands on the hips, and he's looking at me, and he said, "Are you telling me you can cure scoliosis?" And I just laughed at him, and I said, "Chris, sit down." I said, "Look," I said, "I never told you that." I said, "You've lived all your life with a back condition that doesn't allow you to do the things normal people do. So therefore, your back muscles are very weak. And what's going on, you have nothing to hold you up with. But when you take the oil, it kills the pain, does some healing, but it'll allow you to do the things that you haven't been able to do all your life. And your back muscles will build up. And eventually," I said, "you should be able to go without the oil." And that's exactly what has happened. Another little funny thing I might add about Chris, about a month after we met, he was leaving the house one night, and he put his hand on the doorknob, and he looked back at me, and he said, "You can't go back, can you?" And I knew what he meant, and I said, "Well, Christian," I said, "would you want to go back to all of that pain?" Well, he said, "Of course not." But I said, "Look, once you know the truth, there is no going back. No, that's it. You know." So Christian he is thoroughly convinced, and his mother has used the treatment too, with good effect.